Donald Trump under investigation this Friday night for possibly making death threats. His comments targeting a political foe.
When the guns are trained on her face.
As measures ramp up to protect election workers.
This is for an active shooter or bomb.
She lost her only children to the trauma of war.
This one here is Ron and Ryan together.
The New Brunswick woman named this year's National Silver Cross Mother. Return to sender when Canada Post workers could go on strike and the possible economic ramifications. Plus, all trick and no treat.
Oh my God.
The Halloween hoax hundreds fell for.
Global National. Reporting tonight, Sophie Louie.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. It's down to the wire in the U.S. presidential election. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are set for dueling rallies in Wisconsin, one of the key battleground states they're both desperate to win. With just 4 days to go, concerns are growing over the heated rhetoric on the campaign trail and the possible violent consequences. More on that in a moment. But we begin with Jackson Proskow and the controversial comments from a former president that have now triggered an investigation by Arizona's Attorney General.
As Election Day nears, Donald Trump's violent rhetoric has only grown more alarming. Thursday night brought a new low as Trump took aim at former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney, who has endorsed Kamala Harris.
She's a radical war hawk. Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. You know, when the guns are trained on her face.
Cheney responded on X. This is how dictators destroy free nations. They threaten those who speak against them with death.
This must be disqualifying. Anyone who wants to be president of the United States who uses that kind of violent rhetoric is clearly disqualified and unqualified to be president.
Trump's comments landed in a race defined by extreme polarization and record early turnout, just as the campaigns are trying to sway the few remaining undecided voters.
There are plenty of people who, the last week of the campaign matters because there are going to be people that will decide at the very last minute.
Harris's campaign believes that over the last week, the words of Trump,
I'm going to do it whether the women like it or not,
and those around him,
there's literally a floating island of garbage. I think it's called Puerto Rico.
Have had an impact, even as polls show the race completely deadlocked.
Hello, everybody.
If Trump is worried, he isn't showing it, convincing his supporters there's no way he can lose.
We have polls that came out just now. We're doing very well. Somebody said 97% chance of winning. You saw that? 97%.
The final few days of the campaign will see both candidates continue their frantic push into the 7 battleground states. Sophie, in some of those states, the race is so close that it could be decided by just a few thousand votes.
Jackson Proskow in Washington, D.C. Thanks, Jackson. Well, fears of political violence have prompted a security overhaul at some polling stations. 1 in 4 election officials in the U.S. has reported facing abuse or threats following Donald Trump's baseless claims of election fraud. Jeff Semple is in Georgia, where poll workers and police are being trained to respond to everything from bomb threats to chemical weapons attacks.
This way, sir.
The last day of advance voting in the southern swing state of Georgia after a record-shattering 4 million early voters, half the state's electorate.
Good to see you again.
Georgia Bulldogs superfan Deidre Holden is elections director here in Paulding County, outside of Atlanta.
I've been doing this for over 20 years. I've never seen a turnout like this for early voting.
And she's also never seen anything like this.
So the red buttons you see are panic buttons.
Desks for election workers are now equipped with panic buttons, which notify police. Staff carry Narcan nasal spray, which protects against opioid overdoses in case of a chemical attack. And this button triggers an alarm through the building.
But this is for an active shooter or bomb.
She's had bomb threats before, after the last presidential election.
And it was pretty much they were going to blow up all of my election day polling locations. They were coming after me, that they would do whatever they had to do to show this world how wrong our election was in 2020. I never thought we would come to this.
The new security features include many new security cameras, including this one covering the hallway leading into the elections office. All of this is in response to the growing number of threats that followed false claims that the last presidential election was stolen.
This was a fraudulent election.
Georgia found itself at the center of that fight when Donald Trump phoned its Secretary of State.
I just want to find 11,780 votes.
Falsely claiming he'd won. 4 years and dozens of investigations later, that lie lives on.
There were problems with the 2020 vote. There's no question there were problems.
With suspicion on both sides.
Everybody is wary, let's say, of everything.
So now people have had 4 years to sort of marinate in that thought and hear these theories, and it's really escalated into threats.
This former homicide investigator and state elections director says police are playing a more active role.
Law enforcement wasn't trained in any of this stuff.
Georgia is now the first state to mandate election training for police.
This is actually a threat that I got.
Chris Harvey has also received threats, which posted his family's home address online.
And the message basically said, if this doesn't go well, we can have January 6th at everyone's house.
Have your photo IDs ready?
Indeed, more than the election itself, Holden fears what may come after.
Once those votes are in and the results are in, that's when I'm going to be worried.
Election workers hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst. Jeff Semple, Global News, Dallas, Georgia.
Well, the vast majority of the candidates' more than 200 campaign events have been in the so-called battleground states where the race could go either way. Michigan and Pennsylvania have had the most visits. Pennsylvania also the target of the most election ad spending. According to a group that monitors election spending, from July to October, more than 1/5 of all political TV advertising nationally was in Pennsylvania, where the parties spent nearly $400 million Canadian. Our Mike Armstrong is in the state capital of Harrisburg tonight with the reasons why Pennsylvania is so crucial. Mike.
Well, Sophie, the main interstate that runs through this state is the I-76, the Pennsylvania Turnpike. Well, here's a way to think about it right now. It's basically, for both candidates, the path to victory.
If we win Pennsylvania, we win the whole thing. It's over.
That isn't really an exaggeration. Over the last 40 years, with just 2 exceptions, the winner of Pennsylvania has won the White House. It also tends to be close. In 2020, 6.9 million people cast ballots, and it came down to just 80,000 votes, barely 1%. It's winnable for both parties. It's also big. To win the White House, a candidate needs to hit 270 Electoral College votes. Pennsylvania has the 5th most of any state, 19. Add it all up, and you have the reason no state has been visited more by the candidates or their surrogates.
I can't emphasize enough that Pennsylvania is, I think, the linchpin in this election.
Now, there is one thing that makes Pennsylvania an outlier nationally that also invites controversy: how it counts mail-in ballots. People have been sending in their votes for weeks, but by law, poll workers are only allowed to open and count them on Election Day. In 2020, it took 4 days to come up with a winner. That delay ratcheted up the conspiracy theories and anger. More than 100 people from Pennsylvania were arrested for taking part in the January 6 attack on the Capitol. Well, this time around, officials in several counties are investigating fraudulent voter registration applications, and Trump's leaning into it.
Because they've already started cheating in Lancaster. They've cheated.
Now, passions are inflamed. East of Pittsburgh, local officials are apologizing for a float in a Halloween parade this week. It depicted Trump traveling in a small vehicle with a sniper rifle on the roof and Kamala Harris being pulled behind with her wrists bound. All of this makes Pennsylvania a state to watch on election night and a state to watch in the days after election night. Sophie?
Mike Armstrong in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Thanks, Mike. Now, on Tuesday, we will have live coverage of America Votes, a Canadian perspective on this historic election. Donna Friesen will be in Washington, D.C., and we'll be streaming live beginning at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, wherever you watch Global News, including BC One, globalnews.ca, YouTube, the Global TV app, Pluto TV, and Prime. The death toll from Spain's worst natural disaster in decades has now topped 200 as rescue teams battle to reach areas still cut off due to heavy rains. Crews are searching for bodies in wrecked cars and destroyed buildings as residents salvage what they can following monstrous flash floods earlier this week. At least 205 deaths have been confirmed, a number likely to keep rising. Thousands of volunteers have traveled to the Valencia region to help in cleanup efforts, while locals struggle to find essentials like food and clean water. And forecasts are predicting heavy rains in parts of southwestern Spain overnight. In the Middle East, hopes of a ceasefire are fading. Overnight, Israel's military carried out more strikes on Hezbollah and Hamas. More than 10 Israeli strikes hit Beirut, the Lebanese capital. The IDF says it was targeting weapons plants and Hezbollah command centers. And Israeli strikes in northeastern Lebanon are believed to have killed at least 24 people. In Gaza, the Hamas-run health ministry says Israeli airstrikes have killed at least 64 people in the last 24 hours. Last-minute talks are underway to avoid a shutdown of Canada Post. The union, which represents 55,000 workers, could give 72-hour strike notice at any moment, which means a strike could come as soon as Monday. And as Mackenzie Gray tells us, a work stoppage could have ripple effects throughout the economy.
From parcels to paychecks, a looming postal strike could end up impacting millions across the country.
It will be very painful for those businesses who completely depend on the post office.
The Canadian Union of Postal Workers rejecting an offer earlier this week from Canada Post that had a nearly 12% pay increase over 4 years and better protection for pensions, making a labor dispute which could start as soon as Monday increasingly likely.
We're obviously active in trying to facilitate a collective agreement.
If a deal isn't found, 55,000 postal workers would be off the job and letter service nationally would be canceled. Pension, disability, and EI checks sent through the mail wouldn't be delivered. And Canada Post wouldn't deliver parcels, which they've done less of in recent years, with an only 29% market share, leading companies like Amazon to tell Global News there'll be a minimal impact on any of their orders. Shipping fewer packages has led Canada Post to hemorrhage money, with a $3 billion loss between 2018 and 2023, making reforms at the Crown Corporation likely needed.
It's almost like they're rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Here they are discussing an 11% increase in wages when they could be downsizing and laying off 30, 40, 50,000 people inside 24 months.
The last postal strike, 2018, which saw a month of rotating strikes, ending after the Trudeau government passed back-to-work legislation, something the NDP would not support in this instance.
I made this really clear in the minority government to Justin Trudeau, and I said, if you ever bring any sort of back-to-work legislation, we will never support it.
The Liberals will likely need the NDP's support to continue to govern, which could make them think twice about using any tools to end the strike, Sophie, like they recently did with rail workers.
All right, thanks for that, Mackenzie. Labor disputes are also brewing at ports on either side of the country. In BC, the union representing 700 dock foremen has given strike notice, and their employer responded with a lockout notice. The ports could shut down as early as Monday. A 13-day strike last year disrupted more than $6 billion in trade at BC ports. In Montreal, the union representing 1,200 longshore workers started a new strike yesterday, forcing the shutdown of 2 container terminals and paralyzing 40% of the port's container handling capacity. Danielle Smith recently marked her 2-year anniversary as Alberta's premier. Coming up, how her leadership is now up for review. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith is facing a crucial test this weekend. Her leadership of the governing United Conservative Party is up for review. In the past, Conservative premiers in that province have seen their careers cut short with anything less than an overwhelming majority. Heather Urix-West looks at how the vote has shaped Smith and her government's actions of late.
The first week of Alberta's fall session has been busy for Premier Danielle Smith.
No one should be pressured into accepting any medical treatment without their full consent, including a vaccine. We're proposing changes that would protect the future choices of minors who identify as transgender.
The whole reason it was such a busy week is to get this out in advance of the AGM.
Because emotions have been known to run high about vaccine policies and identity politics among some members of the province's United Conservative Party base. Thousands of delegates are gathering in Red Deer, where Danielle Smith's leadership is up for review.
There's 6,000 people. It's the biggest in the country's history of any political organization, which is, I think, super exciting, but it also leaves a little bit more to chance.
Technically, Smith only needs 50% plus one to stay on. But Jason Kenney stepped down after garnering just over 51%. Both Alison Redford and Ed Stelmach resigned after receiving 77% of votes.
Essentially what she's doing is campaigning based on who the electorate is. When the general election came on and there were 4.5 million Albertans, she had a different message.
Smith's pivot from tax cuts and health spending to parental rights and vaccine freedom appears to be paying off on the AGM floor.
I think that's going to go very much Smith's way. I know there's some small groups that would like to make some trouble for her, but I don't think that those are going to sway the room.
And everybody, the constituency associations are extremely pleased with the direction that we're going in, and they want to give Danielle our full support moving forward.
But whether that translates to the same level of support across the entire province, well, Alberta is 3 long, likely years from its next general election. Heather Urix-West, Global News, Calgary.
The heavy toll of war ahead, this year's National Silver Cross mother on losing both of her sons. Military families are all too familiar with service and sacrifice, but one New Brunswick woman has faced the unimaginable loss of her only children. The trauma of serving in Afghanistan took the lives of both her sons. Heidi Petracek introduces us to this year's Silver Cross mother, Maureen Anderson.
This one here is Ron and Ryan together.
Maureen Anderson wasn't surprised when her boys joined the Canadian Armed Forces as soon as they could.
When they got a little bit older, they were always playing army games continuously, way back. Right from there, they were destined to go to the army.
Maureen's father fought in the Second World War, her grandfather in the First, and she was a nurse in the Royal Canadian Air Force, which is how she met her husband, Peter, of the Royal Canadian Regiment.
Yeah, he was one of my patients, and he asked me for a date, and the rest is history.
Their only children were born 5 years apart. Ron, the oldest, on the left, the mischievous one with an infectious laugh. Ryan on the right, quieter, more serious. Each left high school early to enlist, first training at nearby CFB Gagetown.
And this is Ryan's graduation, me for the battle school.
They served multiple tours overseas, Bosnia, Ethiopia, Haiti. Then came Afghanistan. Ron went first in 2003, then was joined on his second tour by his younger brother in 2007. During that deployment, 6 Canadians were killed by a roadside bomb. 5 were friends the brothers knew from Gagetown. Maureen was relieved when her sons came home alive.
How did you feel when they were back?
Oh, I was so glad to see them. So glad to see them.
But her boys had changed. They were later diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD led to Ron's death in 2014 at 39 years old. Only after his passing did his parents learn he'd been recognized for heroism during his time in Afghanistan.
He helped save a little boy's life that was hit with a car right ahead of them, I guess. He must have been in his Jeep or something. And he jumped out to help the boy, and the guy that was with him said, "No, don't get out, you're crazy." And he said, "No, I'm not leaving that little boy on the road."
His older brother's death hit Ryan hard as he struggled with his own psychological trauma. Ryan died in 2017 at 38.
And what advice would you have for other mothers who have children going through PTSD because of their service?
Stay with them, support them, hug them.
Maureen's husband, Peter, died a year after Ryan. She visits all their graves almost every day.
Don't think about the sad stuff. Just think of the good things we had and the good laughs.
She draws strength from the grandchildren her sons left behind, one of them also in the military. Maureen's life has been defined by military service, a legacy of pride and pain. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Oromocto, New Brunswick.
And we'll have live coverage of this year's National Remembrance Day ceremony in Ottawa. It all starts Monday, November 11th at 10:30 a.m. Eastern, 7:30 Pacific, here on Global Television, our website, globalnews.ca, and all of our streaming platforms. Artificial invitation. Next, how all these Halloween revelers were tricked.
I'm so Julia.
British pop sensation Charli XCX has been everywhere this year. Her album Brat has more than 1 billion streams on Spotify, and Collins Dictionary has now landed on brat as its word of the year. The word became a cultural phenomenon. Brat summer became a whole lifestyle. Collins says brat is characterized by a confident, independent, and hedonistic attitude. Dubliners got into the spirit of Halloween last night, only to be ghosted. Hundreds of people packed the capital's main thoroughfare in anticipation of a Halloween parade that never happened. The parade turned out to be more of a trick than a treat. It ended up being an elaborate prank that appears to have been created by an AI-generated website based in Pakistan. Oh my God.
That's crazy.
The bogus promotion advertised online promised viewers a fantastic light show and giant floats. But when everyone discovered they had been duped, Dublin's city centre descended into chaos, with people pouring onto O'Connell Street, bringing traffic to a standstill and forcing police to move in. And that's Global National for this Friday night. I'm Sophie Louis. Tonight's Your Canada is a beautiful fall day in Trinity East, Newfoundland and Labrador. Thanks for watching. Hope you can join us again tomorrow. Have a great evening.